I got to tell you guys about a few new products over at our favorite CBD store. That's, of course, PalomaVerdeCBD.com. The first thing I'm going to tell you about that's brand new over there is these THCV gummies. There's 10 milligrams of THCV per gummy and 10 gummies per jar. A lot of y'all are probably familiar with this THCV. Some people call it diet weed. It's very good for intermittent fasters. THCV helps suppress or dull your appetite, which, of course, a little bit unlike regular THC that, as you probably know, or at least you've heard, can give you the munchies. THCV helps promote energy, unlike regular THC, which, of course, makes you feel kind of mellow. This is legal, oh my God, legal under the Farm Bill. So thank you, Farm Bill. The second thing I want to tell you about that's new over at PalomaVerdeCBD.com is their full spectrum nano CBD soft gels. These have the perfect amount of CBD with THC. 25 milligrams of CBD and 0.27 milligrams of THC per soft gel. Their everyday formula brings your body back to homeostasis and adds this nice extra layer of chill. I like that. I think you do too. A lot of us need that now and again, or maybe every day. Nanotechnology allows better absorption into your body, even better than their other products, which was already amazing. Again, this has a calming effect and it lasts about 6 to 8 hours. And of course, like the other stuff, it's legal under what? The Farm Bill. Thank you, Farm Bill. It's legal. I would not get you guys in trouble. Go over to PalomaVerdeCBD.com. They've got a lot of great products. I talk about them all the time. The massage oil. They've got the sleep bundle. They got nano CBD soft gels, CBD bath bombs, which are amazing. Gummies, tinctures, all of that stuff. Of course, for my French bulldogs, Lux and George, the pet tinctures and the pet gummies. All of these things are over at PalomaVerdeCBD.com. Oh yeah, did I tell you about the cool menthol sports cream? Of course I have before. It's the best sports cream in the world. I get reviews from customers on this all the time. That's the number one thing I like from this company. And they've got all of these great things. Over at PalomaVerdeCBD.com, you will get a promo code because Carlos and Vanessa, the owners, love this show and they want to help out the listeners of this show. Promo code BUCK at checkout gets you 20% off of your order over at PalomaVerdeCBD.com. Promo code BUCK at checkout gets you 20% off of your order. Go give them business and in turn, give me business. Now, let's get back to the show.
You are now listening to the Counterflow Podcast, a place for dissonant voices and unapproved opinions.
You get split in fucking half, but I call the hologram graph. But I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Here is your host and humble narrator, Buck Johnson.
What's up, you guys? Welcome back once again to the Counterflow Podcast. So glad you're with us here again this week where I've got a first-timer. A first-time guest is on the show today. That would be Miss Courtenay Turner. And I should thank my friend Kyle from the In Liberty and Health podcast because she's on his show from time to time. And he wrote me the other day and he said, it just hit me the last time I recorded with Courtenay Turner, you and Courtenay would have an amazing conversation. So he basically gave us the hookup and we started writing, messaging back and forth. I said, well, what do you like to talk about? And she says, well, philosophy, conspiracy theories, the New World Order, transhumanism, geopolitics. And I said, wait, okay, well, that's already more than enough because I love all of these topics. So we're going to dive into these things, dive in deep with Courtenay Turner here. And I will tell you quickly, I mentioned she's a first timer on this show. She's the host of the Courtenay Turner Podcast. She is also the host of What is Movement. She will have a new show coming soon called The Right Voices. She's also a speaker and an aerial acrobatic performer. She's here for the first time on Counterflow. Courtenay Turner, welcome to the show, ma'am. Glad to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, it's your first time, so as standard good etiquette would go, I should have you give your own kind of intro and talk about whatever you really want my audience to know about what you do and what you're into, and we'll jump off from there.
All right. Well, I am the host of the Courtenay Turner Podcast, and that's Courtenay. I spell my name kind of funny, like Courtenay. And you can find me pretty much everywhere except for YouTube and Twitter. I've been kicked off both of those. But I have my website. And I'm a speaker and an aerial acrobatic performer. And I have 2 other shows that are in the works. One is called WIM, What is Movement? And it's a show where we explore ways that movement helps people to heal emotionally, mentally, physically, spiritually. And then my other one's called The Right Voices. And I say it's a counter to The View, but the only thing it really has in common with The View is that it's an all-female roundtable, although we do bring male guests on periodically. But it's really not very much like The View because we do much more kind of underground topics, and hopefully we're very different.
Yeah, I would. From what I know of your work, I'm thinking you're quite different. Do you ever, just out of curiosity, have you ever watched The View in the last year or so, just out of curiosity to kind of see what
clips? So I've seen clips, and they've annoyed me to the extent where I don't think I could sit through a full episode.
Same, right?
It's interesting though. I mean, as a kid growing up, I did. It was definitely. I don't know that I ever loved it. Although I really liked it for a period with Elizabeth Hasselbeck, although she was, mercilessly attacked. But that was hard to watch. But yeah, but I feel like it's gotten progressively worse and worse and worse. It's just kind of unbearable to watch.
It's something else. It's one of those things where I'll stumble upon it and watch just for a sec. And I'm left going, after maybe 30 seconds to a minute, how do people watch this? I must be living in a different world. I don't get it. It's nuts.
We are.
What are some of the things? I want to get into the things that you talk about on your shows because, well, it's a lot of the things I talk about, and we'll get to how this came about and whatnot. So kind of explain to my audience the things that you like talking about.
So I talk about a very wide range of topics. And they may seem like they're not all that connected, but they really are. My central theme is really free will, personal sovereignty. So I cover everything from like health, fitness, medicine, to philosophy, psychology, politics, geopolitics, sociocultural zeitgeist. And it's really just I like to do deep dives and really at a place to, my 3 words I always say are to inform, inspire, and empower. So it's really just conversations that I hope will provide some information. Hopefully they will inspire you to dig deeper and empower people to take ownership of free will, because I think that's really what's under attack currently. And, without that, I think humanity ceases to exist. So
you talk about what some people would deem as like conspiratorial type things. And you mentioned geopolitics and things of this nature. How did you get into that?
I would say really the podcast. I'm just a deep dive person. So I remember when I was first considering the concept of doing a podcast, a bunch of people suggested it to me. And, since people were suggesting it, everybody's got an opinion on how it should be done. And the thing I kept hearing from people was, well, you want it to be like a 15, 20 minute, really catchy. And this was their marketing advice to me. And I said, oh no, that's just not going to happen. And I remember people who thought they knew, a lot more than me. And granted, they probably did. They had more experience and certainly more knowledge than I did in the arena. But they didn't know me all that well. And I said, oh, that's just not going to happen. I mean, I'm a deep dive person. Like I'm a, quality time is like my number 1 love language. There's no way I could do something that's like cursory. And I actually, truth be told, there are times where I have guests who will say to me, I have 20 minutes. And of course, I will always respect, what they have. But I actually get so much more nervous because, especially if it's somebody I don't know. Because I feel like people take a while to warm up and I want to go really deep. It's really hard to go really deep in 20 minutes. And in 20 minutes, it's more of like what I call the gotcha style interview. You have a list of questions, you're trying to hammer them and, get a quick punch. And that's really not what I'm interested in. What I'm really interested in is going really deep down. I always joke, hand me a bag of carrots and I'll go down the rabbit hole. And so I started the podcast, I think I say naively, but I think I really had much more faith in the 2-party system, I thought, if we can just get the right people in office,
Yeah.
and then, we can turn this whole country around. We're going to save the world. Because I really do think I've been kicked off Twitter. My pinned tweet was, that I use the analogy of the beekeeper. I talk about how when they say when all the bees go, that humanity will cease to exist. And I think that America is kind of like the beekeeper, and therefore it's incumbent upon the people of America, the American people, to stand for the free will of humanity. Because when America follows, so the world follows. And so I really did see it that way, that we would kind of, I know that may sound grandiose, but I really meant it more in the spirit of, we do have the Constitution, we have our founding document that, they codify this notion that we were endowed with these rights by our creator. And that's not something that, other documents around the world, founding documents, have.
Mm-hmm.
So I felt that because of that, we had a chance to, if we just got the right people in office. And since I've been doing this and doing lots of research and talking to lots of people, I see it much more. I saw it, to be fair, my very first episode was about spiritual warfare. So I always saw it that way. I think I just didn't, I had a different perspective on the tactics per se. And as I've been diving and learning, I really got to see the much more global context of things. And I think just understanding really how this all gets executed and how far back it goes. So, yeah.
When was that
I
first
think
episode?
The election too. That at that time, that's really when I started to, open up my perspective much more. Yeah.
Which 2016 or 2020?
2020. I think 2020.
Okay.
That's when I really started to have a much better understanding of how things are globally coordinated.
Okay.
Yeah, I was very late to the game. I'm grateful. No. I feel like I'm a pretty quick learner. So, but I was really late to, yeah.
Okay. Let me ask you then. Let's see, March of 2020, we all can basically remember that was a massive life-changing month or world-changing month.
Yeah, the lockdown started for us in March 18th.
Yeah. Okay. I always think
March 16th. March 16th. I was supposed to do a poll competition March 18th.
Oh, okay, and that's in Tennessee. Or I don't know if I can say where you're at.
I was in California. I was in Santa Monica. Yeah,
that's right. Okay. Oh man, yeah, they didn't stop for a long time in California. Is that why you ended up leaving?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
I was done.
What was your thought process like over the time? Like, what was the timeline of? Okay, it's March 16th. They're locking down. What is this about? When did you start to kind of maybe remove the scales from your eyes and see things as more clearly?
So the lockdowns they started the 16th. I was supposed to do a poll competition the 18th. That was canceled. I was super, super bummed about that. So what was I? So the lockdown started, and then I had started to think that it was a really good time for me to write. And at the end of 10 hours, I had a beautiful white screen staring back at me. And I realized that, maybe this wasn't the time. And I was just too anxious and depressed to do that. And I can't force the creative process. I knew enough about that. So I ordered 11 books and I started reading a lot and really just doing a lot of research. And, pretty early on in this whole, orchestrated pandemic, as I call it. I was fired from both of my gyms that I was coaching at. And I can't guarantee, I can't say with 100% certainty, but I am pretty sure that I was fired for politics from both of them and for political reasons. And then I was also starting to line up my speaking and aerial performing, and those were all shut down, obviously. And so I really found myself with a lot more time on my hands. But I remember really early on people asking, and they're like, "You're not afraid of this thing, the COVID, And they kept asking, and to be fair, in the first 2 weeks, I wasn't really afraid, and they kept asking me, and they're like, "Why?" And I said, I don't know. I mean, I think part of it is just like my worldview. I kind of feel like if it's my time, it's my time. I'm not looking to put myself in harm's way or anything, but, I don't have this kind of pending fear. Right? That's just not really how I operate. It's not how I live my life. And I've also just been through so much physically that I was kind of like, I just don't see this being the thing that's going to take me out if it's real at all. I just really didn't see it that way. And pretty early on, though, I felt like something's not right. I mean, within the first 2 weeks, I said, really early, because with the mask, I'm like, this is just crazy. Why on earth would you tell everybody to wear a mask? Like, this isn't going to do anything. And that all of the media, the like just overwhelming propaganda, I was like, there's something's really not right. And the 6 feet apart. I was just kind of overwhelmed with all of that. And I was like, if there's really a virus, I mean, there was also just all the hypocrisy, I mean, they're closing the gyms, they're leaving the essential businesses where the like donut shops and liquor stores, but gosh forbid we'd keep a gym open, don't take care of your health. So I mean, all of that just started to, so I really never bought into that per se, but the measures were so overwhelmingly horrific for me. I mean, I don't support anybody really wearing a mask. I think there's lots of reasons not to. And really early on, I was saying how they do more harm than good. But for me, I'm hearing impaired and I'm visually impaired. And so I learned how to speak by reading lips. I didn't get hearing aids till I was almost 6 years old. And so I still depend and 2020 really taught me this. I still depend very largely on lip reading. I didn't realize that. And people get so frustrated with me because they could tell that I knew they were speaking. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, it makes sense. If we're having this interaction, obviously you're speaking. That doesn't mean that I have any clarity of speech. It doesn't mean I can decipher what you're saying. And I depend so largely on lip reading for that clarity of speech. And so that was really frustrating and isolating. And then I'm blind in one eye. So when I wear them out, I already only have about 60% of the peripheral vision that somebody who sees binocularly does. And so when I wear the mask, it's almost like I only have 40% because it further reduces my peripheral vision. And I already don't have motion parallax. I have to adjudicate for depth perception intellectually. So it was, I was getting claustrophobic and disoriented and it was just kind of a nightmare for me. So, and I was feeling incredibly isolated. Now I'm stuck, shut in. I can't communicate with other people. I can't see their faces. And I mean, this is just a personality thing, but I really just don't like being told what to do. I mean, if I want to do something that's not all that good for me, like, I like to drink wine periodically. I know it's a poison, but that's my decision to make, and hopefully I'm perspicacious with it, but it should be my prerogative. So, I mean, that's just kind of a silly example, but, we all make these choices, right? But I have the information and I know what I'm doing. And then it's for me to make that choice. So I don't want the government telling me you should wear a mask. You can't go out. You can't go out after 10 p.m. because this virus has a curfew. I mean, what happens? 9:59, all of a sudden it's like, all right, time to come out. Like, it's just ludicrous. So yeah, I was done.
So then what was the timeline of recording your first episode, of thinking I need to leave California? Maybe I want to do a podcast. Where was this at then?
So it was, I think it was probably around summer, with the riots, if you will,
sure. Yeah.
Where I had always felt that one of the biggest problems with, people who are anti-establishment or even people just on the political right is that they engage in auto-critique. I was familiar with the Maoist struggle sessions, and I know that auto-critique didn't work so well for them. So I felt like, I don't want to be a part of the problem. If I think that's one of the biggest problems, then I should not be the problem. So I had started to speak on social media. And it's interesting in hindsight, because just to look at the trajectory, because I really didn't I didn't start off really all that political, and I didn't even start off with much of my own personal commentary. I started off posting a lot of philosophy, psychology, and maybe some analysis of, either thinkers or articles or, but things that didn't. But the reason I say it's so fascinating is because your worldview seeps through, right?
Oh, yeah.
So your perspective is going to come through, even though it doesn't overtly seem quote unquote political or even ideological in nature. And so I had slowly started to irritate some people, I guess, just by posting, what I was posting. And then I started sharing more articles that were centered around, some of the research findings around masks, for instance, or, the virus, for instance. And that certainly was losing me more friends, to say the least. And but it was around the summer where people started to suggest that I start a blog podcast. And then after the election, or as the election was coming closer, I had joined a thread. I had been invited to, like, a Facebook thread, and I had met two who became my business partners. We started this publication, and that took several months, before we really kind of decided what we were going to do. And in the meantime, it was around, I think, December, just before, so like right before 2021, where I started the podcast. Yeah. And then just shortly after, maybe a few months after, we officially launched. It was called Truth Matters. Unfortunately, one of my partners, so it was very short-lived. I wrote several articles in that time, but unfortunately, one of my partners passed, and we closed down. So I'm hoping when things get, more streamlined, I will get back to the writing end of it. But yeah, I was doing quite a bit of writing, like investigative pieces.
Okay. One of the things you talk about and we hear about in maybe in our circles, the plans of the elite.
Yes.
We hear this
I
phrase.
talk a lot about this.
Yes. I want to get into the weeds with that, but this is the kind of thing that people, quote unquote, normies will ask me kind of point blank. Well, what's the ultimate plan? Like, you talk about this stuff a lot. What's the ultimate end game of the quote unquote elite? How would you answer that?
If I had to, really simplify it, because there's lots of, right? Then I would really say they want to depopulate as many as possible. And then they want to transhumanize and control the rest into a technocratic AI transhuman / post, which will become post-human feudal system. And that's essentially their plan. So I think they realize that they don't want feudalism the way we had it hundreds of years ago, because they realized that actually wasn't the best. It wasn't the best for them, because you really want feuds who think that they have the illusion of being free.
Yes.
And if they have the illusion of being free, then they will work much harder. But they don't realize is that they're working to serve their teleological ends, not, that of their own. So,
in your studies, are there, let's say, maybe warring factions of these people at the top? Or, I mean, it can't, from my own research, it's not just one group of, there's always some that seem to be against each other. Have you found that?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know that I would have, that's an interesting way to put it. I don't know that I would put it quite that way. There's, because they create warring factions. I think they intentionally create warring factions. Amongst them, I think that there's more, they tend to unify much more than the warring factions they create, mostly because they're so aligned in their end goal. And they're often, and this just may be me being a little bit overly optimistic, but I think that they're such, like narcissistic megalomaniacs, psychopaths, essentially, that they don't acknowledge necessarily that whatever pawn might not be working in their favor. I think oftentimes, so like here's an example. I talk about this a lot. I think just to, make this a little bit more concrete for people.
Yeah.
So China, I think people often ask about China, like what's going on there. And I personally see China as a pawn and a model for the elites. If you look we propped up China. I don't think, I don't have a crystal ball. I don't even have remote viewing capabilities. So or maybe I do, I don't know how to use them. But, so I can't tell you with certainty that China couldn't have grown to be the power that it is without our assistance. But I am very familiar with Nixon and Kissinger's rapprochement plan and how we really built them to the power that they are today. But I think they did that in the hopes of creating this model that they were going to replicate and beta test things on, and then use China as also a pawn to serve their ends. What they didn't count on is I think China feels like they've gotten, they're getting a little big for their britches, and China thinks, hey, well, maybe we can just dominate and we can be the world power. And I think that's part of why they're trying to, overthrow Xi Jinping. And, I think there are some nuanced things that are occurring there because they don't want China to feel so empowered and so emboldened that they can take over and dominate. They want to keep China as a beta testing grounds and as a pawn to serve them for what they need and for what they want. I think that's an example. They don't always understand that there might be groups, like Soros is a great example too. Soros isn't completely aligned. He wants an open society. It's not the same as, their very rigid kind of fascist global, technocratic. They really want, when I think of the outside of Soros, I think they're really looking at something that is more of a one world socialist government, right?
Yeah.
That's not quite the same as an open society. So there are overlaps and there's some synergy there, and it certainly, they both have hopes of world domination. They both want to destroy nation states, and they certainly want the power to reside within the elites and not within the people. So there's lots of crossover, and the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So I think they see it that way. But
where do you think Putin fits into this puzzle with Russia? Have you thought about that?
I have. I've thought quite a bit about it. So I think it's similar, not the same as China, but I think it's similar. I think that Putin wants Russia to dominate. Putin is really doing what he can do to serve Russia, grow Russia. I think Putin ideally would like it to return to the Soviet Union and potentially expand beyond that and be, the one. He would like the one world government to reside with it to be the Russian Empire. And I don't know this. This is just my projection. This is my speculation. I am not inside his head, nor do I have conversations with him. But that's kind of what I see. He's trying to protect them. But who was it? Jacob Rothschild. And I've heard that this isn't, that it was made up, it's not factual, but I'm inclined to believe that whether it was said or not, that it's kind of the sentiment said that the single-handed largest threat to the New World Order is Vladimir Putin. And I kind of see that he's definitely a threat to the New World Order, mostly culturally. He's very much fighting against Western culture. And I think this is what's confusing to a lot of people because they think about Western culture they think about it in a very sentimental, kind of nostalgic way. And Western civilization has done tremendous things for humanity and civilization as a whole. But that was more like the ancient Greeks or maybe the founding fathers of the United States of America. That's not the modern Western culture that is being exported today. Modern Western culture that's being exported today is the rainbow flags that you see all over our embassies. That's not, it's not doing much to further the agenda of humanity, or the advancement, I should say, or betterment of humanity, So, and Putin seems to be very much against that. He's against a lot of the cultural exportation and wants to return to a more traditional type of, nuclear family. There's arguments about whether or not he's really Christian. He's not Christian. I don't know that it matters. I think the results speak for themselves. So I don't really care so much. This is just me personally. I don't care so much whether he's a Christian or whether he really cares about, promulgating or evangelizing, evangelizing. Sorry.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's
People,
all right.
I don't know I don't know that it's ultimately that important. I mean, to some people it may be, but I think the results are very similar regardless, because he's promulgating those values. And that is a bulwark against the New World Order.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think that's probably the case as well. You mentioned the term transhumanism, and I know a good segment of my audience will be familiar with that. But it's something you hear fairly often, at least in my circles. My audience might be thinking, "You hear this often? Who the hell do you talk to?" But kind of explain what that is, and maybe where we are on this path towards that, because of course there's step by step, and it changes as technology grows, and try to kind of paint a picture for my audience of what this entails.
Okay. Yeah, it's funny. I did a podcast with Dr. James Lindsay and Jay Dyer.
Yes, very, very good one, by the way.
Thank you. I literally had that vision for 11 months. And I was like, I have to make this happen. They didn't even know who the other person was. So it was super awesome. I know. It's weird, but it was super awesome to see that come together. And I thought they were fantastic. I'm now thinking of a third person I want to insert into that arena, but that due time.
Alex Jones. I'm halfway kidding, but halfway not.
Yeah.
But
that would be interesting. That actually would be interesting. That is actually not who I was thinking. I would have to get. I would like to interview Alex first before I had that happen.
Yeah.
Just get a one-on-one with him.
See how you can tame him a little bit.
Yeah. But yeah. So, but the reason I brought it up is because Dr. Lindsay had peeled me back a bit. He's like, hold up, Court. Not everybody knows what transhumanism is.
Right.
Like, oh, right. Yeah, of course. I spent all day reading this stuff,
Yes.
So really, I guess kind of just the very cursory explanation. People talk about it as the enhancement of humanity. And they always do that where they couch it in very benevolent or, really euphemistic type of phrases. And that is, to some extent, that does explain it. But where they really want to go, and this is not theory, I won't even say conspiracy theory, because it is a conspiracy. Clearly, conspiracies exist. They can only exist in the dark, and therefore it's incumbent upon us to shine light on them, to expose them. But this isn't a theory. You all know Harari and Klaus Schwab and all of their acolytes have been talking about this very, very openly, and it's in all the white papers. You go back to even Bertrand Russell, you go to Smythe, who coined the term technocracy. You talk about H.G. Wells, Open Conspiracy, all of these writers. Certainly Julian Huxley, Aldous Huxley wrote about it in science fiction term, but Julian Huxley coined the term transhumanism. So, it makes you wonder how much of Brave New World was predictive programming, how much of it was just a figment of his imagination, or a combination thereof. But all this to say that they really want to get to the place where we are a hybrid between machine and man. And ultimately, that will lead us to a post-human world where machine and AI will take over and replace humans. And, you all know Harari talks about how 2020 will be remembered for being the moment in time, and it will be significant because it was the moment where everything went digital. And he very specifically, explains that when he says digital, he doesn't just mean your smartphone, your computers, and not just the technological conveniences, but he says it will be digital going under the skin. And he really does make that very, very clear. It's very explicit. So that's really what they talk about. He talks about how, I can't remember how many he said, but it was tens of thousands of people have already been chipped. And, that number is going to increase. But the truth of the matter is they don't actually need chips. They have these self-assembling nanofibrous structures. Certainly we know about the Neuralink. Charles Lieber was partnered with Elon Musk on the Neuralink. He has the patent on what's called the neural lace, and it's the little nanofibers that are thinner than a strand of hair. He has patents on self-assembling nanofibers. He certainly has patents on injectable self-assembling structures. So the technology really is there. It's more a matter of they want to get people to a place where either they opt into these things, which is what they're trying to do with the metaverse and convince people that, a transhuman world is so much better.
Yeah.
And then I think the rest of them, this is very cynical. And it's, of course, I can't prove this, but I think the rest, they're going to try and figure out a way that they can do it without them consenting.
Yeah. The convincing people like this is a good thing. And we're, like you mentioned, we're seeing with the meta stuff. One of the things I've discussed over the past few weeks is this doesn't necessarily look like communist Russia, where they're marching people up and forcefully throwing them in gulags and being violent and threats of violence and stuff that genuinely, strikes fear into people. Right. This is kind of being done in a way that strikes comfort and I guess happiness. It feels weird for me to say that, but to a lot of people it is happiness into people. And I think it's so much easier
or the false kind of
correct. I think it's easier to accomplish things like this with kind of a numbed out population. It's almost like a comfortable digital gulag, so to speak. Can you speak on that?
Yeah, I think absolutely. And I think that they're achieving that through many different mechanisms. So, right? There's certainly the technological, where people are getting their dopamine hits from all of different social media, from their phones and the screens. And there's certainly that and the conveniences, right? One of the selling points was why have to take out your smartphone or your credit card? You can just bring your hand up to the reader, and how convenient is that? Or why bother having to type? They can just read your mind. And Facebook does have a patent on the wearables that will read your mind. Of course, again, this is couched in terms where they're helping people. They talk about how somebody who's paralyzed they can now be part of the conversation because they don't have to type. They can just read their thoughts. And isn't that so wonderful? So there's of course, all of the conditioning and propaganda. And a lot of this conditioning really is hypnotic in nature. And they do use a lot of mind control tactics for propaganda. And they lay the groundwork that, this is like Fabian socialist tactics of incrementalism. So, they couldn't just go straight to the injection. People probably would have fought back. There would have been a lot more civil disobedience, I think. I hope. If that was the first thing they did after 2 weeks to, stop the curve, right? Yeah. To flatten the curve and slow the spread. Now everybody has to get injected. If they rushed right to that, I think people might have said, hey, hold up a bit. But first they started with the math and they did all of this fear porn, and then they go to that. So there's some of the propaganda tactics that they use. And then I think there's also the element of a pharmacological perspective. When you look at how many people are literally numbed out on, now all the studies came out, right, with the SSRIs, and now they're moving towards normalizing psychedelics and plant medicine. And I think that that's really going to pave the way. They're doing a huge cultural push and propaganda. I can see it. It reminds me a lot of the 60s. Yeah. When they used to call Valium Mother's Little Helpers.
Yes.
And that's what you're seeing with a lot of this microdosing culture. A lot of the moms are taking it and talking about how much it helps them with their anxiety, and it helped them to get off of other pharmaceutical substances such as SSRIs or Adderall. And they're using this as a replacement, or people who are talking about their, other types of plant medicine awakening experiences that they had with big trips and, at the festivals, or, some sort of a shaman has guided them, and, or they did it in their home. And I'm not saying that nobody's ever had a beneficial experience.
Right.
There's always exceptions to the rule. And in some cases, it even can be. Absolutely. People can have a wonderful experience and effect. But I think this idea of reducing boundaries, which is what psychedelics do.
Yes.
And you're blurring the boundary between reality and subconscious and dream states. And that makes people much more susceptible and open to notions like being thrown into the metaverse.
Yes.
And, a transhuman kind of, we are one, let's upload our conscious that we supposedly don't have. But we're going to upload our consciousness to the hyperic mind. And then there's also just, traditional kind of predictive programming and, television entertainment, and where they condition you to, they numb you out, like you were saying. So people are very, they're in a trance. And the news does this too. You get this. It's this routine type of, and they have a lot of technology that's tied to this also. They have like flicker technology where they used certain light frequencies. Mm-hmm. They have sound technology that literally hypnotize you. And I think it was Rockefeller who did it back in, I'm blanking what year, but they changed the frequency of music, radio, from healing to a less harmonious for the human system.
Wow.
They changed the frequency.
McDonald's used to do the same. I think they still might. I don't know, but the light would be a certain, I guess, just the way the lighting was, and the chairs being hard plastic was to get people in and out of there very quickly. So to kind of, and then of course, nicer restaurants conditioned you to want to stay, and the same type of thing.
Holy.
Yes.
And the other one is food, of course. So they have a lot of like aspartame has been used, and there's studies on this with MK Ultra to literally like numb people out and limit or reduce their cognitive functioning. Of course, so they have a lot of that. There's been so many things that have been like chemicals and food. Or not really food, but that have been done to remove us, to deteriorate our pineal glands, our intuitiveness. There's also just our education system, which has numbed people out too, to the point where they're not, they're not developing critical thinking skills, and that's a form of numbing out as well. So it's not just the indoctrination; it's also this pacification. And I think, and then they do the psyops that pacify people also.
I want to ask you about psyops because...
Sorry, that was a lot. I don't know if I covered it.
No, Courtney, it was great because this is kind of what I wanted to jump into. You hit so many topics. The psyop thing, even for those of us who study this to an extent and research this and watch these things, how do you personally tell the difference between a psyop and, say, I don't know, an organic one-off actual travesty? Let's say a shooting in a store somewhere, because these things are very often used as psyops, but does it start as a psyop? How do you determine these things?
So I don't know that there's like a specific roadmap or blueprint for how you would, and I don't know that I could always conclusively say like, this is definitely a psyop or a false flag. I think that's really what you're asking more. Psyops are slightly different,
right.
It's more of like false flag kind of situation.
Yes.
So I think, and you're right to say that sometimes something actually does happen and it gets co-opted as a false flag. They utilize it to serve whatever agenda they may have, whether it be to pin it on, a certain group or to target a certain, I think they really tried to instigate a lot of insurgencies, we'll call it, not even just, a lot of chaos is a better word. They tried to, incite that in order to have an excuse to go after 2A. And I think they've done that several times. So, and that's typically what a lot of these false flags are targeting. But I think a really great thing to look at is there are some telltale signs. So we know that our intelligence agencies have worked with people who are susceptible, impressionable, like maybe they are on mind-altering drugs already. Maybe they come from broken homes. Maybe they have kind of a past of some sort of mental health or psychological unrest. And that makes them much more susceptible to being conditioned and programmed. And then they might guide them to, assist them and provide them with certain equipment or infrastructure that they might not have access to otherwise. So those are some telltale signs. There's also, I think, inconsistencies.
Yeah.
That happen a lot. And that's usually what I look for. Things that don't line up. It's like why you wouldn't have this and not have this. And I'm trying to think of a specific example, but I don't know. And I don't know if that serves to give the examples, but
right.
But, and then the other thing is really just, like crisis actors. I remember really recently, I think it was with the explosion at the Bat Building, and they interviewed this girl who supposedly like woke up, from the explosion, and she runs out in like her, supposedly just from her slumber, and she's got, her hair done, a full face of makeup. Like, I don't know about you, but that's not how most of us wake up,
right. Yeah.
And I'm just watching this, like, this isn't even good acting. And I know they have crisis actors. I've seen the ads. Now they actually have them on job sites.
Yeah.
Like, where they'll say Washington, D.C. seeking crisis actors. So for them to tell us that these don't exist is kind of ludicrous. But those are kind of the things I look for. And then I look for who are they pinning this on? And does it really make sense?
Right.
I think that, the Gen 6 is a really good example.
Yeah, right.
It just logically doesn't make sense. If you were really a Trump supporter, you were still listening to Trump speak.
Yeah.
He was still speaking at the ellipse. Like, doesn't make sense. Like, well, why would they wouldn't have been over there. So.
Yeah, that's, I think it's so fascinating because you hear the term crisis actor and it's like, yeah, there's crisis actors, but like, think about that. The fact that exists is really telling. And like you said, they're on job sites or whatnot, Craigslist or whatever. But the fact that crisis actors exist, if you're listening to just put that into perspective, just think about that.
This is the stuff that kills me because, they gaslight you so much. I'm a crazy conspiracy theorist. I hear this all the time. And I did a rant recently. I'm like, I'm going to own this. I actually do make theories sometimes. I present theories. And I will say, I don't have all the evidence. I don't know that this is, but hey, all arrows seem to point this way. I think it's worth looking. Maybe we should collect some more information. But, you look at, I think the one I was diving into today, I'm going to post about is Project Adrian. So, so Project Adrian, they want, and it's the conservative because, they do the dialectical attacks on both sides. So you have the narratives that are being put forth and being injected into various different groups and certainly on both sides of the political aisle and then even groups within that. But one of the things that I think a lot of the conservative media is trying to convince us is that this weaponization of the IRS is a new phenomenon. Right. And there is something called Project Adrian, where they have gone to college campuses, which are, kind of the indoctrination mecca. Right. And they have done these like simulations of merging criminal investigation with accounting, because, of course, as an accountant, you would need to know how to use arms and to handle a forensic case, because that makes perfect sense. An accountant who's sitting and crunching numbers absolutely needs to have this skill set. So they go into these schools and they teach them how to do this. And they've been doing this for years. It's literally called Project Adrian.
Interesting. I was not aware of that one.
Yeah.
We've learned something new. Thank you, Courtney.
You're welcome. But when I talk about the reason I brought it up is I'm talking about gaslighting, and they want us to think these things. Now, if I were to say, like, this has been going on, this has been, weaponized for a while, you're going to tell me, oh, no, that's crazy. But the information's right there.
Yeah.
You're going to call me crazy for looking at the evidence and just telling you what I'm seeing?
It was similar to, there was a lot of kind of, I would call it boomer con talking points after the raid on Trump's place there in Florida.
Right.
Next thing you know, the FBI, if they can do it to him, they can do it to you. And it's like, they've been doing it to you, I mean, normal people for decades. What do you mean now?
Right.
It's kind of new that they do it to an ex-president. That's new.
For sure.
Of course, they've been doing it to regular rank and file folks that's since they've started. So I thought that was a strange talking point from the quote unquote right on that. I want to ask you something, and we have to be very careful couching the language on this one.
Yes. Okay. Got it.
And I saw some of this on your Instagram today, some stuff that you had read about a study.
Okay.
What can you talk about anything you've discovered or learned that's a negative side effect from we'll call them pokies that people received over the last few years? And we have to be careful with how the language here. But can you talk about some of that?
Yeah. Well, all-cause mortality has increased drastically. And that is not since the beginning of this quote-unquote error, if you will. That is since the pharmaceutical experimentation began. And so that's very telling. There has been lots of neurological disorders and diseases that have been showing up as a result. Some of which are just horrifying to watch, like this twitching type thing. And I know people who it's happened to, where they have, it's almost like loss of motor control and they start convulsing. That's really, really horrific. There's certainly, of course, the, blood clotting that myocarditis type instances as well. The clots are very interesting because, so what they're not talking about is that there has been some analysis done of what is in these things that they found that people have died as a result of, and it is not life. So it does look like they are definitely self-assembling structures. They are not made of life form. They are growing. And just so people know, that's entirely possible. I mean, we've already seen they can, they have robots that can procreate. I don't know if procreate would be the right word to use. That's right. Usually a term for life form, but they can create new beings, new offspring, and that exists. That's not it's not even all that new. And certainly, if you believe in germ theory, which that's probably a whole topic for another time, but if you subscribe to germ theory, then they stipulate that viruses are not living and they replicate and they grow. There's certainly prions, which is part of what we're seeing, prion disease. And that is where you have misfolded proteins and they can amass and they can replicate. They misfolded proteins that will then instruct other proteins to replicate. But because they're misfolded, they're given, this is not the scientific terms. I'm just breaking this down for the layman, and then they are not replicating in accordance to, the integrity of the structure. So, so there are things that can grow or replicate that are not living, and that is what they're seeing. But that's also kind of scary. So we don't know exactly what that is, but when you dive into what patterns exist, one might question. I certainly posted a bunch of stuff about graphene oxide, and that seems to be very possible. Again, I can't confirm or deny that, but there were a lot of people saying, I've had people on my podcast talk about that they did find graphene oxide that was reduced to hydroxide in some of these microscopy results. So, and we know that those can be made into circuitry that can be used for remote control, certainly for electronic type devices. And
Yeah,
They can be binary weapons payloads that can be activated remotely.
the patents that comes up so many times, and I started this show a few years ago as a strictly hardcore libertarian show, and sometimes I joke that like, well, some of those issues have turned out to be not super important. But one of the ones that keeps coming up, I'm so against intellectual property, and boy,
I am too.
It's patent after patent after patent. If there was no intellectual property, a lot of this stuff could not happen.
I know.
It's crazy.
There are very few people who would agree with us on this, but
I know.
I've talked about this as well. It's kind of, I think, an important issue, and I think it's a real concern. I don't know. This is one of those things that I think possibly was co-opted. Like it may have had, good intentions. The road to hell was paved with good intentions, kind of thing. I do think initially that. But it became, I think part of the problem is just the legal structure in general. I mean, that natural law, we don't need this, complicated legal system that we have. That natural law really should be the law of the land. But all that to say that, that was definitely, it gives them an opportunity to manipulate and usurp the control and power over a lot of these. And also to have proprietary information, which, I mean, I think that's one of the most dangerous components of it.
Yeah. Ideas that you somehow put together, now you own that formulation of them together, and the government grants you the monopoly on it that no one else can have. Yet most people would go, no, I don't like monopolies, but they certainly support those monopolies. I get it. It's a very niche topic, and most people don't think of it in those terms.
Most people just aren't familiar. They haven't thought that far. But I'm hoping that's going to change. I think we really need the legal system needs a major deracination, I think.
What are some of the biggest, let's say, lessons you've learned or takeaways you've had thus far in your podcasting and speaking career? What have you learned that's been really valuable to you that you were, let's say the Courtenay Turner of 2 years ago would have been like, whoa,
Interesting. So when you say lessons, do you mean like personal lessons, or do you mean like, what do you mean by lessons? Because I could go in many directions with this.
Give one or two. That's interesting. That's a very good way to break it down. Give one or two personal lessons, and then give some stuff that may be spiritual or geopolitically or anything like that. That kind of thing too.
Okay. Well, I think one of the things that I learned really early on in starting the podcast, I think, was that I kind of came to the conclusion that the Republican Party was controlled opposition for the left, and I think more people can agree with me that that's what it's become, but I would actually argue that that's actually how it was designed. I actually kind of really do think that at this point. So that was very different from how I felt when I started, So I would say that would be one. What else would I say? I think personally, it's really interesting just to... And I think this is true kind of just as a speaker doing the podcast. I learned a lot about just the power of passion, persistence. There's so much that I really just keep going. And I don't know how to say that more eloquently, but because there's so much. When I started this podcast, I was saying I really thought I was getting into the business of like conversations and research. And I think I have a fair command of those things, but there was all this like tech and, logistics and just things I knew nothing about, or things that are really not my strong suit. But you'd be surprised if, you're committed to something and you have a commitment. And I think a lot of times that comes out of a passion and a sense of purpose, then you'll figure those things out. So I think a lot of people just don't start things. And, it took me a bit to start both with speaking and I would feel like, okay, what am I doing? But, once you start, it's kind of like when you go to the gym, a lot of people have a hard time getting there.
Yeah.
But then 15 minutes in, they don't want to leave. They're really into it. And, there's always exceptions. But I find that, I found that with most people. Most people, getting them there was the hardest thing. And I think that's true for a lot of things in life. Once you get started, then the momentum picks up. And that's not to say that it'll always be easy and that you won't have.
Correct. That part, just like the gym.
Yeah.
When you start these things that are important in life, it doesn't mean like, well, this will be an easy journey.
No.
Expect it to be tough, because if you want to get in better shape, it's not easy. It hurts and you're sore and things suck, And
you have to keep challenging yourself.
Yes.
So I think that's really, a huge part of it too. So is to take on the challenges. So when it does become easy, what do you do to grow? And I think that's true I've learned that in my speaking, in my aerial acrobatic performances, in coordinating and organizing the events, because a lot of my speaking, I organize the events, certainly with the podcast, there's, and I think there's also something to be said for having visions. I think that gets criticized a lot. I tend to have kind of an entrepreneurial spirit. I'm definitely a visionary, and I was an actress. I'm an artist. I'm a creative, and a lot of my life I've been very much criticized for, being a dreamer and having those. And I think it's really important to always have actions to back it up. But it's important to have those visions. What is it you want? What is it you're, have something, and no matter how silly or how big it may seem, I think that's important to have both of those, just like the little things that would be big for you personally, and then maybe other people don't understand why they're important. And then, the really big goals and lofty that you may achieve, you may not. And then to be really prepared for, whatever comes along the way. So you may have things that there are opportunities and things I really wanted that didn't come about. That I'm actually in, I know it sounds so cliche, but it's kind of hindsight's 2020. And in looking back, and there was a reason why, or there was something better for me. And it's something really kind of just like little and silly, but, don't let, like, for instance, the censorship. So, I was kicked off of YouTube, I was kicked off Twitter, and I was surprised by how upset I was by it at first, because I expected it. I really did, because a huge part of my, just my purpose in all of this, I didn't want to engage in auto-critique. And I felt like on both platforms, I was constantly censoring myself. And I hated that, because I felt like it went against what I stand for and why I started this.
Right.
So, but I was still shocked. And it was a bit of like, oh, okay. And I was hurt, I see other people growing, and I'm now derailed in some ways, because now it's that much harder to get my word out and get people to even know what I'm doing. So, but I also feel like there's a lot of power in, your authenticity and, alignment with an integrity. And when you're very true to that for you and your path, then I think not only does your path become clearer, but the people who are in it are also a much better fit. Yeah. So it was ironic, because I started to, other doors started to open up for me as a result of it. And I became more connected to people I really want to be connected to, in some way. So, I don't know if those are some lessons, I guess.
Yeah. That was perfectly said. All these books behind you, for those watching on YouTube, you see them. Give off the top of your head. I didn't prep you with any of these questions, but certainly this one. Book recommendations for those listening.
Oh my goodness! I feel like
I know you could say there's 100, but just a couple of.
I know. Wow. What would I? And some of them are in my bedroom, because I'm always reading like 10 books at once.
Same. Yes.
Yeah. I never have like just one. Yep. I refer to, and truth be told, I've never like sat and read the whole thing. I use it much more as like a textbook, but I refer to it in almost every episode I do, is Tragedy and Hope.
I see it back there.
Also his Anglo-American Establishment.
Okay.
Yeah, I actually think that's a really important. It's a much shorter book. In some ways, it's more dense and not as easy to read.
Okay.
But again, Tragedy and Hope is more like a textbook that I kind of go through. And I think it's such a seminal book to what we're up against right now. I would say I can't see all. So I don't have it here because it costs like $5,000, I think it was, to buy the book. But it's a book on, it's by Dr. John Coleman. I love his work. And it's on Tavistock Institute of Human Relations, shaping the moral, I can't remember all of it, but like moral, religious, something, cultural decline of the United States and Great Britain. And he's written a couple of other books that I think are great as well. But that one was really, I would say, pretty special. And Dan Estulen does great work as well. And he wrote a book on Tavistock also. Tavistock's like one of my topics that I like to deep dive on. I think that, who else was I thinking who is great? I'm blanking. I was just thinking of somebody. I mean, I think it's helpful to read like Anthony Sutton. I think he does really great work. If you're interested in kind of like the conspiracy world, I think because he's very mainstream academic. He really is a historian, very legitimate, does really great work. Annie Jacobson. And I don't know if I have, do I have her work? She's awesome. I have DARPA, the Pentagon's brain, DARPA right there. She does fantastic. She's a journalist and she does you can see how big that book is. She does deep investigative work. And that was one of my favorite, but I haven't read all of her books. So there might be others that are better. And I love philosophy. So one of my all-time favorite, this is kind of like an intro to philosophy book. I actually did an independent study on it in high school. It was super basic, but it's really cute and it's fun, is Sophie's World.
Okay.
So for anybody who kind of wants, I think that, while I think this is very much a spiritual battle, I think that the philosophical framework is very instrumental in advancing their agendas. And I think in a lot of the conditioning for people. So I think it's helpful to know the philosophical history of, some of the seminal thinkers. So, yeah.
Awesome, Courtney. Now we'll get out of here, but now you have to plug your stuff. Any web addresses? I guess you're not on Twitter or YouTube, but that'll be easy to not plug those. But anything you'd like, please do.
Yeah, well, I have my website and it's still like in early stages. So I'm still learning how to, upkeep all of that. But that's the CourtenayTurner.com, super easy. But I spell my name like Courtenay Turner. I'm on Instagram at Kinetic Courts, and I'm pretty active on there. And there you'll get like a hybrid of my podcast, politics, ideas and whatnot. But you'll also see a lot of my fitness stuff. And, hopefully that'll inspire you to take on your challenges and, get out there and move. And I show some of my aerial work on there as well. And then I'm on, for the other socials, I'm on Truth Social at Courtenay Turner. And then my podcast, the Courtenay Turner Podcast, super simple, is that the video platforms are Rockfin, Rumble, BitChute, Odyssey. And then I'm on like every audio. So I'm on Megaphone. I'm on Apple, Podbean, iHeartRadio, Spotify. Yeah.
Cool. So, Courtney, thank you. This has been great.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Yes.
Awesome.
Thank you. What a great conversation. Thank you again, Courtenay Turner, for this discussion. I think there will be more of these to come. Great to have you on. And thank you guys for sticking around. If you'd like to donate to this show, you're more than welcome to do that at patreon.com/counterflow. Let's see, I could tell you counterflowpodcast.com has all of my links. At Buck Rebel on Twitter is how to follow me on Twitter. And like you heard in the ad, I am running for city council. So if you'd like to donate to that, it's once again, misisgop.org/buck. I better learn that and be able to recite it quite well, just so I can fund this crazy little campaign for Lockhart City Council at large. Until next week, you guys have a good one. See ya.
You get split in fucking half, the icon, the hologram graph. But I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Like the sound of the Counterflow podcast? Our audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at podsworth.com.